Welcome, Rustin. I'm welcoming you to your church, even though I'm the visitor this week. But it's good to be with you, and I enjoy our conversations. These are really fun for me, and hopefully for you guys too. Our idea, of course, was that there are opportunities that are embedded in the setbacks of the virus, and one of those opportunities is that we're not bound by time and space anymore, and we can be together, and we can create a conversation instead of just talking by ourselves into a camera. And so I think that this is engaging, and I've gotten good feedback from it. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming out here, out to Belton, and being here at the Vox Cafe again this week.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. By the way, this has worked well, but it also is some things are getting easier as we go. Mm-hmm. Some things I'm just getting so tired of, and I can't wait to get back to seeing people and being with people physically. And I was just pondering that because it seems like our journey through the Beatitudes this far has followed a similar trajectory. Like there's a sense in which the intensity of these things are increasing, or the challenge of them, and that kind of mirrors the intensity with which our culture is driving deeper into division and
it's really true,
and crisis.
Yeah.
And so when we started out in this, I thought, well, we're going to be in a time of disruption. It would be good to find this solid ground of the kingdom with Jesus language and go to the Beatitudes. But more and more, I find myself going, man, I really need some orientation from Jesus, and his words are continuing to challenge and orient and kind of line me up in a place that's honestly pointed in a lot of different directions than the available views. I should say, I'm trying to be gentle.
The available views,
from one side or another on any given issue.
I agree.
Anyway, it's been really good for me, and I hope for everybody else that's joining us.
I mean, the disruption that we have been feeling, it was not anything that we would have predicted when we began the Beatitudes, but it's been such a blessing to be talking about these now and in this time, and they continue to be really timely. The Beatitude for today is from Matthew 5, I believe it's verse 9, that says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Yeah. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." And of course, before we get into it, we just want to establish right off that the coming of God's kingdom and the Messiah has always been associated with the coming of peace. Mm-hmm. So peace goes hand in hand with everything that our faith is about. Yeah. For example, we go to Isaiah 9, and as Isaiah looks forward to the Messiah, he writes, "For to us a child is born, a son is given." This is very famous. Mm-hmm. "And the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father." And then the last title is Prince of Peace. Yeah. Prince of Peace. "Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end." I always like that sentence. "Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on forever." So I love that language, but it strikes me as really odd hearing that language here. What are we in the middle of June? Mm-hmm. Because that's a Christmas reading. Yeah. And I just realized that I so associate that enduring government of peace with that little baby lying in the manger. Yeah, right.
But is that a way that maybe we dismiss what's really going on there by associating that with baby Jesus, and then but he'll grow up and get around to
that lends
some muscle.
That lends itself to our conversation.
Okay.
But let's not allow seasons like Christmas to co-op all those verses to take the meaning away from what is so important for our lives.
Okay.
But Rustin, we're going to get into that, because the first thought I had is, man, this is a timely conversation, because if there's anything that we need is peace. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, you know what though? A lot of people in our nation would disagree with me, and they would actually say this is not timely, because what we need now is justice. Yeah. Now, you and I know, and hopefully everybody that's been following us know, that in the Beatitudes, justice is also spoken about. We already talked about the Beatitude that talks about hungering and thirsting for justice, and but it's like, well, what we need is justice, not peace, because peace insinuates laying down our arms, and it insinuates what you just said, a baby in a manger, and just softness,
and the call for it can seem disingenuous. Like if you have a a point of justice that's valid, of something that requires something of me, but I just say, well, let's just be at peace. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just dismissing the fact that an injustice is going on. I kind of want to skip past the hard stuff and let's just get along.
Right. Insinuates skipping and...
Yeah. So the call for peace can be a deflection, or it can be heard as a deflection to those who are still suffering injustice.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's
well
danger.
said.
Okay.
And, we're living in a time now where we are being exposed as being wrong for remaining silent. Mm-hmm. So silence is violence, right? And
right.
and so, again, a lot of times when you hear, this is the time for peace and we need peacemakers, what we hear is we need a lot of silence and just laying down and being quiet.
Yeah.
Again, like so many of these Beatitudes, there's a misunderstanding here. I feel like almost every week we start off by saying, well, what do you think of when you hear purity? What do you think of when you hear... Yeah. We're misunderstanding what's being said a lot of times.
I think that's what these Beatitudes have helped me. One of the many things they've helped me with is leading me into this posture, this season of humility, which we all just need desperately. And I talked about it this last Sunday with Vox folks, that almost everything we know is wrong. Mm-hmm. It's a good place just to start in humility and go, I need to challenge all my own assumptions. I need to ask next questions. I need to listen and learn, and especially, I hope, listen and learn from Jesus.
Totally.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Rustin, I'm going to pose a question for you. It's a scenario. Let's say, I know this never happens, but let's say you're in a situation that has conflict. Okay. We don't have conflict at Vox Day, I know, but
no.
But to make it more, one of a useful metaphor for me is to think of the family, because families always have conflict. Yeah. Whenever it doesn't matter how loving you are as a family, you're going to have conflict. So
only if you see each other.
Only if you see each other, and most families are there's so much dysfunction in them anyway.
Yeah.
So let's just say you're
not ours, but
so hypothetically you're in a family with dysfunction,
okay,
and which means there's conflict. And I don't know what that conflict would be. Use your imagination. Could involve your wife, could involve your kids, whatever. Your parents, all that kind of thing.
That's not hard.
Okay.
I'm with you.
You're with me. I simply want to ask you, what are the available options that you've kind of been trained in for how to resolve the conflict or what to do? Like what do you do typically in your family, let alone in your church?
Well,
what do you do to resolve the conflict? What are the ways that come to mind, or at least the first things that we think of that would actually bring peace?
Bring peace.
What we typically think of as bringing peace.
I regret that the first thing that came to my mind was to bring more chaos and and fight.
That might be a legitimate option.
Yeah. Well, no, honestly, though, what came to mind, that was honest, too. Mm-hmm. Hopefully everything I'm saying is honest.
Yeah.
But not too honest.
That's the fine line we walk as a pastor, by the way. I want to be honest, but not too honest. That's my guarantee. Yeah.
Somebody said, it was Eugene Peterson or somebody talked about leadership is disappointing at people at a rate that they can stand. So we'll see if we can do that today. I just went through this with one of my sons this week when we were in a disagreement about something he wanted and something I wanted, and my first response or my instinct was, okay, I'm gonna lay down the law here. This is I'm not an angry person. I got other problems. I'm not typically angry though. But my instinct, because I wanted it resolved quickly, I was like, okay, here's how this is going to go. And it's going to involve you giving me your technology and you're done. And if you don't do what I say, so that was a way to resolve the conflict and get us back to some sort of workable arrangement was to take over.
Yeah.
Is that something you're looking for?
Well, that's one option, right?
Yeah.
And that's maybe the first option we could talk about is how I resolve peace? Mm-hmm. And how resolve peace. How we get peace and resolve conflict. Mm-hmm. And one way that we've been trained to do that is by fighting and fighting back, but not just fighting by winning. So you gave an example as a parent. It's easy to win when you're the parent because you say, yes, this is how it's going to be. These are our rules.
Yeah.
But that is legitimately, I think, maybe the dominant way that we have been shown to enforce peace is through enforcing it which brings about a kind of conformity. You really didn't get resolution with your son, but you got him to conform to what you wanted.
Yeah. Actually, I caught myself in real time this week because I'm growing up, learning.
Yeah.
And we both stopped and we went a completely different direction. And maybe we'll get around to that now that I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
But I realize that first way is it's not who I want to be. I don't think it's who Jesus is. And
but we're leaving Jesus out of it for the moment, because what we have to do, I think, is give attention to the culture that Jesus was a part of. Because a lot of people don't realize, but Rome cared a lot about peace. In fact, their mantra was Pax Romana, which is
the peace of Rome.
The peace of Rome. They saw their mission as bringing peace to the world. The way that they brought peace to the world was through being powerful and making everyone become Roman, making everyone conform to a certain standard. Yeah. And you understand the logic of that is that if everyone just gives in to our way, there will be peace. Which I kind of think is the mentality of any superpower. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was I mean, Caesar was largely associated with peace. On a Roman coin in those days, you would find an inscription that would say, Caesar Augustus, and then it would say the bringer of peace. And that was the idea. That's why, Caesar was thought of as a god. Yeah. And one of the reasons is because they brought peace through this mass conformity, which is really just another way of saying might makes right. We win. So we can point our finger to Rome, but I also think, as you know, that this is still the case today. This is largely the American way. Is that fair to say? That might makes right, and we bring peace through conformity?
Yeah. It's one of the...
Did I just say something bad?
We'll see.
Okay.
We're just talking to each other.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Yeah, I think it's one of the elements of the classic rhetoric of any empire is we will bring peace. Mm-hmm. If you will devote yourself to us and give us your allegiance, we will make this peaceful so that you can have a stable and peaceful life. Yeah, yeah. But I can't help but keep applying that back though to as a boss, as a parent, my imagination has been formed in such a way that I'm constantly tempted to short circuit any sort of relationality or self-emptying Jesus way and force my way to get to a livable, peaceable situation.
Well, it's understandable that you do that. I think that it's the water we swim in. I think that it's how we have been trained. And I'll just say this. I won't go off on the tangent, but I'll just say between you and me, it's the way of the American church as well. Mm-hmm. So, we've kind of been trained. It's just dog eat dog. Yeah. And the guy who eats the last dog gets his picture on a magazine, that's what it comes down to, right?
I've never heard that.
You like that?
Well, it's an awkward laugh.
Okay, so
that's tough. Yeah.
The first way that we would normally think of resolving conflict and getting to peace would be the way, we could say the way of Rome. That's safe now. Okay. But the way of Rome of conformity, winning. Yeah. Any other thing come to mind about how?
Well, I think of my own personality that I'm a person who values being at peace, but what I have discovered is I can do violence in another direction by withdrawing, by avoiding.
The passive aggressive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's another legitimate option, Rustin. You just ticked off the first two things that I listed.
Man, I'm on it.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree with you. I think in other words, we achieve quote unquote peace and we resolve conflict by we experience tension and then we just flee. We ignore. Okay. That would be probably more about what people are criticizing the white community for today is just white flight and ignoring and remaining silent. But we just we just remove ourselves from it. Yeah. And you're right. It's really violent. I know that. When I feel a tension in my family, we started off talking about families, like with my kids, for example, and if they just turn away and walk away from me, it always feels so wrong. Like, don't do that. You can't do that. It feels almost violent. Like I need you to be here with me. Yeah. But I think that we've been trained not just to win, but we've also been trained in this other way, and of just if people are hurting you, ignore them. And there's wisdom in that, but at the same time,
right? Yeah, but withdrawal and distancing yourself, I think this has just been a hard lesson in my life. That withdrawal can be as painful to the other person as attack.
It can be.
Yeah.
And you and I know that well because our vocation is one in which people constantly walk away from us or leave the church. And, and it leaves us sometimes going, man, I wish they would have told me what they didn't like or what was wrong. And, you know, Rustin, I won't elaborate too much, but I just had a situation with someone in my church who had been there for a few years. And and you know what, you won't believe this, but the conflict arose. And the situation arose. And to be more specific, he was instigating a conversation with me where I could tell that if I said what I wanted to say, it was going to create conflict. Okay? And it's funny because in my head, at the same time that I was processing through this, I knew that sadly, that the moment I created the conflict, that was probably his ticket to leave the church. You know, that he wouldn't stay with me. And of course, that's what happened, is that he was like, oh, you created conflict, I'm going to leave the church. Deep down inside, I so desire to see people go, oh, okay, let's navigate through this conflict. You know, let's come to real reconciliation and real peace. I know that hardly ever happens. Yeah. I knew exactly what would happen.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I know. I'm telling you foreign stories. But I knew exactly what would happen is how it played out, but I also knew what my desire was. Like, oh, it's so bad that because we have not been trained in what I would call a third way of achieving peace.
Well, it sounds like the word that came to mind when you said working through that conflict is the word that Jesus uses here. Making peace.
Making peace.
Making peace. And suddenly I said it that way on purpose because peacemaking suddenly becomes an emphasis on the making.
The making of peace. It's not necessarily the keeping of peace or just the living in peace, but it's making peace.
Yeah. So
I think we've got, on one hand, we've got fighting, the way of Rome, the way of government, the way of superpowers. We have the way of avoidance, which is the way probably for the rest of us that aren't super powerful, the way of fleeing. And then, but I don't think either of those make peace. I don't think.
I can see how even as you're talking that those are ways you might argue that they keep peace. Although then we might have to wrangle about what peace is. But at least it keeps conflict away.
Yeah. One of them,
but they're not making anything.
Yeah, one of them makes conformity, and one of them makes what is the other one just makes the opposite of community, isolation.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes isolation.
Which was the kind of thing in my heart about parenting this week is I don't want conformity, and I don't want distance. What I want is real interactive relationship where we come to understand and we walk together through. And where we have differences that we sort those out and listen to one another and.
So I feel like there's a third way of making peace that Jesus is addressing here. Okay. And what we need to do is lean into that. What is that? I mean, after all, we have to remember that Jesus himself says in John 14:27, he says, I leave you a new way to peace. Yeah. I leave you. I mean, he addresses it directly. He says, I leave you. He might as well have said a third way for peace. He says, I am giving you my peace, but not in the way that the world gives peace. So I think he's addressing exactly what people felt from Rome and from one another. He says neither of these, either winning and fleeing, don't bring peace. Here is what brings peace, and this is the third way. And now
that's good.
And now it becomes our job as pastors to make known what this third way is, and that's where it gets tricky because, quite frankly, I'm all muddled about it. I mean, I think I have some answers, but it's tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm ready for your answers.
Okay. Well, you know, I might let you elaborate on this as well. I always think that the cross, that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think about making peace.
Here we go.
Yeah, I know, because when we look at the cross, we have you've got the conflict, and then you've got the resolution of the conflict, but it's not through winning or fleeing. It's an incredible presence. Yeah. But it's not a presence that's acting out in violence. It's a presence that allows itself to suffer, a suffering presence, if you will, that is eventually vindicated through resurrection. But I'll throw those big concepts out there for you to.
Well, it's super challenging, and I run across this all the time. I mean, I live in out here in Cass County. I grew up in a even smaller, more rural, more red place. So, my brother was a police officer, come from a military family. I hope that like my street cred, whenever we talk about this type of topic, is legit. I'm a lot of that stuff makes sense to me, or it made sense to me in the isolation of growing up in a small town where everybody's the same color. My journey since then has led me in a lot of different places, and not just culturally, but theologically. And so something that comes up all the time about violence has to do with how people read Jesus to reinforce their own ideas about self-preservation and self-defense and that kind of thing. Now, this is super slippery and it'll probably make people mad. I always have every time I've talked about it at Vox. So
I can't imagine you making people mad.
But, you'd be surprised. But I would like to get into that and get your feedback on it, because there's this one place where people go, and I've seen it recently. I saw a meme. It was on Facebook. Are we really going to talk about this? Chris Rock said there's this new app out that lets you know which of your relatives is racist. It's called Facebook. So he said that 10 years ago.
That's funny. I had not heard that.
Yeah. So I'm just laughing because this is painful stuff. And but there's this meme going around about this time that Jesus, it's in Luke 22, sends his follower, or he's given instruction to his disciples, and he says, and I made a note of this, so let me read it to you. It's in Luke 22:35. He said, "But now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Go get a sword." And so that's up there as a scripture. And then the photo that goes with it is like this AR-15 and a sidearm and a pouch of hand grenades. I don't think it's grenades, but it was used as this thing of like, hey, Jesus said it's okay for me to arm myself, so I'm going to do that. And I'd like to address that because I think it's an egregious misreading of Jesus. Now, let me say, I like shooting stuff, and I'm pretty good at shooting those clay pigeons with a shotgun. I don't do it that often, but I like guns. I grew up around guns, so I'm not like an anti-gun person. But it really bothered me to see Jesus' words used to reinforce this idea that it's okay that we shoot people with our guns. That aside, I just wanted to be clear about what I think Jesus was saying in that. So can we talk about that?
Yeah, because violence is often thought of as a way to get peace.
It's the first way. It's the peace of Rome.
It's the peace of Rome.
If I have more firepower than you, then we'll keep peace here.
Yeah.
But let me put that in context, because there's an episode in Luke where Jesus, in Luke 9, sends out his disciples. And if you remember, when he sends them out, then he tells them not to take anything with them. Mm-hmm. Like, don't take anything. Just go and learn how to be dependent on God. Mm-hmm. Well, now we're getting closer to the cross and in his arrest. And so Jesus instructs them again. And it's the same kind of language. So I'm sure Luke has this parallel in mind. And Jesus says, now, when you go out, like before I told you not to take a purse, but now take a purse and also a bag. Like, take your money, take your stuff. If you don't have a sword, you should get a sword. But then he goes, it is written, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And I will tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, that what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. So there he quotes Isaiah 53 or something about that he would be numbered among the transgressors. So keep that in mind. So the disciples respond by going, hey, we happen to have 2 swords with us. And do you remember what Jesus says to them? That's enough.
Okay.
2 swords is enough. So keep that in mind. So again, that verse is used for like modern American people to go, it's okay for me to own weapons to defend myself, because Jesus told his disciples to get a sword. But there's some problems with it contextually. First, when they're arrested, Peter uses a sword. Do you remember that? Cuts a guy's ear off.
Sure.
And Jesus immediately says, enough of that. Put your sword away.
Yeah.
Put it back in the sheath where it belongs.
Yeah.
The early Christians took that and said, when Jesus disarmed Peter, he disarmed all Christians. And for the first 300 years of the church, Christians would not participate in anything violent. That all changed with Constantine the history that we've all been over. The other thing that happens is Jesus is arrested. He appears before Pilate, and Pilate is asking him, "Are you a king? And are you the revolutionary you're accused of being?" And Jesus says, "My kingdom is not from this world. It's not of this world," is how we usually translate it. But he means, basically, if I was going to start something, I would have told my guys to get more than 2 swords. You think 2 swords is going to start a revolution? You think it's even going to be effective against the temple guards or a single Roman soldier who was trained to kill? So it's a tough case to make from that when you understand how the Bible works and not just cherry pick one verse. I mean, it's the Isaiah 53 thing that Jesus wants to be numbered among the transgressors, which means the appearance of having a couple of weapons around is going to be sort of a Martin Luther King kind of direct action. He's going to force the hand. It's going to look like a bunch of bandits who are causing trouble because they've got a sword with them. But it's clear from what ensues from there that Jesus never intends for them to use those swords, but to do something symbolic. So we're missing the fight scene, and there's no fight scene.
There's no fight scene.
And ultimately, what Jesus does instead is gives himself over to arrest. He willingly goes to the cross, willingly gives up his life. And as you said, the vindication comes in the resurrection, which is a way of God saying we all should listen to Jesus and do it the Jesus way. Which is maybe the third way you're talking about.
I think so.
I know that's super rough, and if nobody's ever heard that before, that blew my hair back the first time I heard it when I was younger, and and it's not a hard and fast rule that immediately leads to political philosophy. That's not what I'm talking about, but just we're talking about what it looks like to keep peace and whether it's legitimate to use violence to keep peace.
Well, I mean, the story of Jesus and the gospel, the formation of his people and his kingdom, I mean, there's so many opportunities for violence. I mean, what he was doing was an instigation of violent acts. And what needs to stick out in our imagination isn't the fact that he, said to bring a couple swords with him. What needs to stick out in our imagination is what you just said, that there's no violent acts. Like there's no use of anything, and even when there is violence with Peter, Jesus rebukes it. So I mean that's the story. That's the story.
That's at least how the Christians understood it for centuries.
Until
maybe they just got fatigued of getting their butts kicked, and it got. They got tired of that.
Well, I mean, we love power. And the truth of the matter, the reason it's so hard to talk about this third way of being a peacemaker is because whenever we're in a position where we actually can be a winner and we can beat the opponent, who among us can withstand that, can walk away from that? I mean... this is easy for me to talk about because there's not much in my life where I can be the winner. I've been forced into a pretty humble situation, but if I had money and power and great resources and authority, who knows what I would do? You know what I mean?
Well, that's part of you've been walking a path of discipleship for a lot of years now. And so some of that is you walk yourself into places where you lay down power.
You do walk yourself into those places. But I think what happened with the early church after 300 years is they walked into power. And they had a choice finally that they never had before. They could be powerful. And that's so tempting. We're still reeling from that.
Makes sense, but it makes it a difficult conversation for us today because we, I think, are blind to how deeply we are shaped by a culture that says it's good to win. It's how you began on this conversation. It's good to be the one having the gun instead of the one defenseless. I mean, I grew up watching Westerns with my grandpa. I still love Westerns. Sometimes now I'm like, I don't know how all this sorts out with Jesus and what would Jesus say to that cowboy?
Right.
Which is becoming more important to me as I get older.
I want to get that on a T-shirt. What would Jesus say to that cowboy?
I think that a lot about just all of our politics. Like sometimes people say things or these days post things on social media, and I'm just like, man, do you really if you would sit down at a table like this with Jesus, are you prepared to defend the position that you're taking? I don't know. I'm just in a place where I'm ready to be challenged on more of that. And I think when it comes to things like violence and keeping peace through violence, it is so baked into our imaginations culturally that to challenge that feels like we're challenging America,
It does.
or challenging my grandpa, who I love.
Yeah, right.
Right, because it's just so part of who we are.
It does, and I think, but I think it needs to be reiterated that this third way is not about just laying down. Because sometimes when we think of the cross, we think of just laying down, but the cross is also this amazing statement in the face of evil that says, "I reject evil." And
so we're not rejecting violence and saying we should run away or be passive.
Being amazingly present, it's kind of a stepping. To be a peacemaker, you have to be in the conflict. You have to be in the fray. You can't run from it. You can't just be standing on the sideline. You've got to be right in it, which was one of the reasons that all of the protests now and the civil action that we're taking are good things that the church needs to be a part of, because that's our way of being present and saying, no, evil will not stand. So if you're a 9 on the Enneagram, this is not your free ticket to go, yeah, I always knew that I was right. That's not the case, because 9s are characterized by avoiding conflict. And this is not about avoiding conflict. I would say probably the 8s and the 1s on either side of them have a foot ahead of them in peacemaking, because they're stepping into things. You know what I mean?
Although I've got a good friend who's a 9, and he's such a hero these days because he's so engaged. He's a mature guy and has been on this Jesus journey a long time, and he's realizing that gift of detachment that he has is allowing him to enter into things that stress me out, quite frankly.
To be clear, you can be a redeemed 9 and be amazingly powerful as a peacemaker.
Maybe it's the best kind of peacemaker.
It's probably the best kind. So that's good to understand.
So it's not the cure for the act of the violent route is not withdrawal. It's not going quiet, but it's staying present, with a different kind of mode, which I think then you have to go to Jesus to say, how did he do that? And I don't think it's ever easy. I think you're right. There's some wisdom that we're lacking, and we have to stay present to Jesus and the leading of the Spirit to know even what that looks like, knowing that we're going to get things wrong.
Well, I think that it involves love, compassion, humility, and maybe that willingness to suffer. That's the hardest thing for us, is that willingness to suffer. And, but humility and compassion, I don't know, Rustin, I thought about maybe wrapping up with this story of a friend of mine who's a pastor, and he has a really good story about implementing compassion and love and humility in ways that make peace that I was inspired by.
I'd love to hear it, because I think this is one of the keys is, I know for me, I want my imagination transformed by the stories that I hear, so that I have other options available to me other than might makes right and I'm going to get my way, even if I have to be violent. And I don't also want to just avoid or withdraw or say I can't take this, so I'm just going to move away to the mountains. And so give me the story of a third way.
By the way, Rustin, which one of those two options is most tempting to you?
Oh, I'm a get out of here person.
Me too. Me too. That's what I always have to check in myself.
That's just the way I'm wired. I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, empathetic, feel everybody else's feelings, and so these kinds of times of tension and disagreement are not easy for me. Yeah, me too. Well, take this for what you will. Hopefully this will provide some help and spark the imagination. But I have a friend and you know him too, but he's a pastor of an evangelical church. He's a lifelong evangelical. But the reason I talk about him is because he started a friendship with a Jewish man, a deep friendship with this Jewish artist who was born in Israel. That in and of itself hardly ever happens in our world. But not only that, the two of them started a friendship with a Muslim man who was born in Egypt. His name was Ahmed, and he was born in Egypt. And the three of them have this friendship, but it's not just a, hi, how are you friendship. They're trying to do things. They're trying to bring peace to the world. So a Muslim, a Jew, and a Christian. I mean, it sounds like
a joke.
Well, and it sounds like a joke because it never happens.
It never happens. And the thing is, what I find most astonishing about their story is that what I'm about to tell did not involve any of them compromising their faith. So evangelicals typically want to hear this story play out, like the Muslim became a Christian, but that's not the story. The story instead is that these three men love each other, and that these three men have started amazing ministries together. One of the ones that I read about is when they're collecting toys. And they've collected thousands of toys for distribution among the poor children around Gaza. The children who have been affected by violence and war and poverty, the children of Israel and the children of Palestine, and the whole area around Gaza, and they have distributed all of these toys because they've put their stuff together. Now, my friend says that when they first started to get together and talk about the proactive things that they could do to make peace, that they met the first time in the U.S. at his church. And when his Muslim friend Ahmed heard that they were meeting at his church and that it was an evangelical church, he was hesitant to come. And he said, "Those are the kind of people who hate me." And what a terrible thing for somebody to think about the church.
Yeah.
You know, but that's where not being peacemakers has gotten us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think when hopefully we'll recap all these in one of our conversations, but the other thing that's brewing in me is as we go through these Beatitudes, I just have this longing for the church to be known by these things, that these would be our characteristics. And so as peacemakers, this is...
You think of the meme that you just mentioned. I mean, if Ahmed goes online and he sees Christians posting pictures of people with shotguns and AK-47s using scripture to back that up, you would be afraid to go to that church too.
He's right to assume that there are Christians in America who think that Jesus sanctions their violence against people who are different.
Yeah. So the three of them wrote up a statement together, and this will be our closing blessing too. Okay. And hopefully, again, like you said earlier, I hope I don't make people mad. This could make people mad, but sometimes we have to make people mad because we're peacemakers, and you can't make peace without making some people mad.
I suppose so.
You suppose so? Okay. They call this "For the Common Good." It's a statement that the three of them drafted. And here's what it says. We are Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and we are friends. That enough is mind-blowing.
Shocking.
We seek to follow our respective religions faithfully. We do not believe all religions are the same. We recognize the reality of our religious differences, but we are friends. We are devout in our faith and respectful of our friendship. Our faith and friendship need not be mutually exclusive. We recognize that we share common space. That might be a great way for the third way too, is to see what we have in common rather than what we have different, right? The common space of a shared planet. For the sake of the common good, we seek common ground. We do not share a common faith, but we share a common humanity. In our different religions, we do not practice the same rituals or pray the same prayers. But in our shared humanity, we hold to a common dream. Shalom, salam, peace. We hold to the dream that our children may play in peace without fear of violence. And so we pledge not to hate. We pledge not to dehumanize others. We pledge to do no harm in the name of God. As individuals, we do not compromise the truth claims of our respective religions, but we will not use truth claims to fuel hate or justify violence. We will practice our respective faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, but we believe our faith can be practiced in the way of peace. We believe our faith truly practiced need never be at odds with humanitarian ideals. Our religions share a complex and intertwined history, a history of interaction that has too often been tumultuous and bloody. We believe there must be a better way, and we seek that better way, the way of peace. We are Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and we are friends. We seek common ground for the common good. Shalom, salam, peace. Amen.
Amen.